I'm Sam. I'm with Deep Green Resistance with 4 others here. You want to introduce yourselves?
I'm Val.
I'm Rachel.
Cooper. I'm Xander.
So this is the last stop on our Resistance Roadshow, which is a speaking tour that we've done up the southeast coast, from Miami all the way up to here. So I guess I'll jump right in. But before we get started, we usually like to recognize that we're settlers occupying stolen land, and we're beneficiaries of a brutal and corrupt system. So if it wasn't for over 500 years of genocidal occupation on this land, we wouldn't be here right now. So we're here in DC representing Deep Green Resistance because we want to talk about fighting back. This year it's officially been 50 years since Rachel Carson published her book Silent Spring, which kind of started the contemporary environmental movement as we know it. And since then, we haven't really seen any improvements in the environmental situation. In fact, in the past 30 years, there hasn't been a single academic study published that's claimed the stability or improvement of any whole ecological system. So that's where we're at right now. And meanwhile, in a lot of social circles, you hear people repeating this rule when they want to avoid conversations that are difficult or depressing or intractable in some way. And the rule is, don't talk about religion or politics. And we think that since conversations that are about religion or politics haven't really led to any material improvements in our condition, that rule should be smashed. And we're hoping that you're here because you agree. But you know, there's a reason people don't want to talk about these things, because politics, religion, gender, race, class, these things, talking about them, unless you're pretty thoroughly deluded about the current situation, they bring some difficult decisions to the forefront. You know, talking seriously about the current situation makes you articulate your allegiances. Where do your loyalties lie? If your loyalties lie with the air and the water and the land that we need to live, then great. If they don't, what's more important to you? So if you know, and you can admit that you know, that the continuation of this system can result in nothing other than the destruction of everything that we need to live, and can result in nothing other than something that we don't want, you're burdened with a choice. Will you do what is possible, or what is necessary to stop the destruction from happening? And if not, why not? How do you justify an action to yourself? How do you justify an action to the generations that come and live on this earth after you? So, to restate an old cliche that I'm sure most of you have heard before, we don't think the system is broken. We think that the system is functioning exactly as it's supposed to be functioning. But maybe you disagree. Maybe you think that the system isn't inherently destructive. Maybe you think that the system can be reformed. Maybe you think that there's just a few flaws that we can work out. So that's why we're here. We want to talk about that. We want to talk about, and we want to get across the fundamental, incorrigible unsustainability of this social and political system as we know it. So our most basic premise as DGR is that the current arrangement of power and resources, which we name industrial civilization, is systematically destroying everything on this planet that we need in order to live. And following from this premise that civilization can't sustain itself without destroying things, we conclude that concrete effective resistance is necessary in order to stop that destruction. So if we're going to accept that premise, we have to talk about strategy, right? How are we going to effectively resist the destruction that's happening every single day all around us? And how can we succeed where past and even current forms of environmentalism have basically failed, even those that have been deemed revolutionary and radical, where we can say that those have mostly failed because we're in the situation that we're in right now. So how can we succeed? But then there's the question of, if we don't like this current arrangement of power, if we don't like this social structure, what do we want to put in its place? We can't just take everything down. We need to talk about what we want to put back, what kind of communities we want to build. So basically what we do as Deep Green Resistance is two-pronged. We fight the destruction that's happening right now. We pinpoint the most destructive entities, and we do our best to make them stop. But also we talk about building back thriving, equitable communities in their place. So I'm going to kind of run through the problem as we see it. The problem which I just named as industrial civilization. I'm going to kind of talk about why that's the problem. So we all know we need food, water, and air. These are the basic things we need in order to live. No one can live without those things. And consequently, these are the things that are also being destroyed every single day. The things that we need to live are being destroyed by this way of life. So you hear a lot of environmentalists, and sometimes a lot of politicians too, talk about sustainable levels of decline. And they're usually talking about these things when they're trying to justify certain industrial activities, like industrial logging, industrial fishing, other kinds of extractive processes that cause like a serious dent on an ecological system. So they talk about, it's okay, it's a sustainable level of decline, you know, we can make it work. But we want to say right now, there's no such thing as a sustainable level of decline. I mean, it should be obvious. If you're taking more and more from a system, from any ecological system, you're eventually going to hit zero. So this is where we're at right now, today. Right now, we're in the Anthropocene extinction event, which is the 6th and possibly the greatest extinction event that this world has ever seen. And if you know your Latin, anthro means human, so this extinction event is caused by human activity. So currently 1 in 4 mammals is at risk of extinction, 90% of the large fish in the ocean are dead, and the world loses over 32 million acres of forest each and every year. So we know that this isn't a sustainable level of decline. This is absolutely unsustainable, and if it continues even for a while longer, you know, we're not going to have anything left. So I'm sure everyone in here knows about the problems with pollution and the problems with clear cuts, the problems with fossil fuel extraction and other issues that we're all fighting every single day. I mean, a lot of you are probably working really, really hard to fight these issues, and necessarily, each one of them poses a threat. But part of our analysis is that none of these problems stand alone. None of these problems are isolated in and of themselves. We think that all of these are actually symptoms of a more fundamental structure, and that's the structure that we named civilization. So they're all basically symptoms that rise out of this fundamental problem, the structure of society. So if we're going to address them, you know, we have to address them at the root of their issue. We can't just address each and every one as an isolated incident. So what is civilization? I keep throwing around this word as the problem, and I haven't defined it yet. Civilization, with our definition of it, is characterized by the growth of cities. So what's a city? Well, a city is many people living on one space, more or less permanently, at a high enough density that they surpass a land's carrying capacity. Or, you know, the carrying capacity is the amount of organisms that land base can support. So if 1 square mile of land can support 1 individual, and you put 50 individuals on that square mile of land, what's going to happen is they're going to quickly use up all the resources on that land. So either then they're going to die, or they're going to take resources from the outside, from outside the city. So that's what you see. That's what a city is. Once populations within cities use up all of the resources within the city limits, they have to get those resources in other ways from the outside to maintain themselves, just to maintain people living in that city. So sometimes those resources are stolen from other human communities, just like this land was stolen from indigenous communities, like I mentioned at the beginning. And sometimes the resources are extracted from the land at a great cost to the land, at a great cost to the beings on the land. So in Book 2 of the Republic, which was written 2,400 years ago, Plato sources the origin of war in the need for cities to take resources from outside the bounds of the city. So this was known that long ago. This is just something that we've accepted. And if you look at it today, you know, we can see this is true. We're always, when I say we, the countries are always staging war against other countries for resources, and there's a very literal war happening against the land. I mean, you see agriculture, which is basically destroying entire land bases, cutting them completely of all nutrients and everything that's growing on them, and replanting them for human use. That's a very literal war happening on the land. So this is what happens when you have cities. You need to take resources from other humans or non-human communities. So if we were to try and have a city without doing these things, it would look something like an experiment that was done in 1944. So there were 29 reindeer introduced to St. Matthew Island. And it's really hard to see this, but I can kind of explain. So the 29 reindeer were introduced to the island, and they didn't have any predators. So naturally, the reindeer reproduce and reproduce and reproduce. And by 1963, the numbers of these reindeer jumped from 29 to 6,000 on the island. So obviously, this island can't support them. There's not enough resources on the island to support this many reindeer. And so because the reindeer can't wage war on neighboring reindeer islands, and because they can't make agriculture, after that winter of 1963, they undergo a crash die-off. And you see the population drop from 6,000 to 50 animals. So this is what happens in any situation where a population overshoots its carrying capacity. You see the graph come up really hard because they overshoot it, and then you see it dive, and you don't see it ever rise that high again because the resources are permanently depleted. So that island will probably never hold as many reindeer as it did back then. So this is our current population graph juxtaposed with the one of the reindeer on St. Matthew Island. You can see the problem here, probably. You can see that civilization, which started about 10 to 12,000 years ago, you see a slow and gradual increase, and then with the industrial civilization, the population basically spikes in the same kind of U-curve that the reindeer did on the island. Now, because we're able to wage war in other countries, and because we're able to use agriculture, we've been able to sustain ourselves for a while, but that doesn't change the fact that we still have a finite amount of resources on this planet, and we're rapidly depleting topsoil, which is needed in order to grow anything. So, we've overshot our carrying capacity. So, this isn't our opinion, and this isn't part of a political agenda. These are statements of fact. These are taken from, scientific research, and basically what they're saying is that we're not exempt from the laws of nature. And if we let it, the same thing could happen to us as it did to the reindeer in St. Matthew Island. But the most important thing here is that we have a choice. We definitely have a choice. We can stand back and let this crash happen. If we continue along this trajectory, let the crash happen. Or, we can do something about it. We can mitigate the damage of this transition. But the thing that we have to realize is, if we want to address this problem, we have to realize that since civilization requires the growth of cities, and since cities require surpassing a land's carrying capacity, if we want to be sustainable, we have to move outside of the structure of society. We have to think differently. We have to do things differently. So the onset of capitalism really exacerbated the fundamental problems that I just described with civilization. And what it did was it introduced an economic imperative for infinite growth and progress, or growth and production. So what it did was progress is now a political ideal. So now progress is the good, the qualitatively good, and it's equated with a quantitative increase in goods being produced and consumed. So you see this confusion between qualitatively good things and an increase in quantity, where the two are conflated. So when things are progressing, production becomes more efficient, and living systems are more quickly being converted into dead products. And in the same way, living humans are converted into chronic consumers. So with the ever-increasing demand for commodities, we also need an ever-increasing demand for resources to produce those commodities. And as those resources start to run out, we see extraction processes becoming more and more time-consuming, less efficient, and more destructive to the land. So when we think about the extraction processes that are kind of new and starting today, we think about things like natural gas extraction, mountaintop removal, and the tar sands, which, this is a really funny picture, if only you could see it. But just like these crazy processes where it's like no one would ever think to take resources out this way unless we were absolutely desperate, unless there wasn't easier ways to do this. And that's just a result of this capitalist and civilization. So as Ed Abbey said, growth for the sake of growth is the ideology of the cancer cell, and that's really what civilization is doing. It's just consuming and consuming and eating everything in its path. It's like a cancer. So capitalism requires infinite growth, and the problem is that we're on a finite planet. So this is something that the capitalists have a really hard time grasping, is that you cannot have infinite growth on a finite planet. So if you see a capitalist, tell them that. That would be really helpful. So everything that I just described is the need of civilization. This is basically what it needs in order to continue running, in order for the gears to keep shifting. But there's a lot more to it. There's a multitude of symptoms that spring from these basic functions that I just described, such as the infrastructure required to create clothing, to create shoes, to create electrical wiring, light bulbs, computer screens, everything in this room. It's very complex, the amount of industrial infrastructure that's needed to create every single thing that we've taken as normal in this society. So what results is the situation that we have today, where we're dealing with air pollution in the UK that's estimated to be killing 13,000 people a year, and 24,000 people a year in the US, just from air pollution from industrial production. In some parts of the Pacific, you have plastic, which is outweighing plankton by a rate of 46 to 1. And plankton, mind you, is responsible for sometimes 1/3 of the air we breathe, and plastic obviously doesn't do that for us. So salmon are dying off because of herbicides being leaked into the water. Coral reefs are on their way to becoming extinct because of ocean acidification, and kelp off the coast of the Pacific Northwest now have been found to be carrying radioactive iodine. So all in all, in 2011, there was estimated to be 226 million pounds of toxic chemicals dumped into US rivers, just US rivers alone. So that's our air and our water, and we all know that our land is being rapidly depleted by a multitude of things such as agriculture, extractive industry, logging, urban sprawl. So just in considering these basic things, we know that if civilization is allowed to continue, it's going to destroy itself along with all other life. Like this has got to be obvious. And it seems obvious to me, but obviously, since things are still continuing, it's not that obvious to everyone else, or if it is, it's something that's ignored. But on subconscious level, it does seem like everyone acknowledges the fact that the future is going to be pretty dire. I mean, think about the movies and the books that are made about the future. Can anyone throw a few out there?
2012.
2012. I mean, really, any movie.
1984.
1984.
The Hunger Games.
The Hunger Games.
All of them are scary.
Yeah, all of them are scary. The Jetsons, Mad Max, The Matrix, Terminator, Terra Nova, Waterworld, every single one, it's people recognize that we're not headed in a good direction. That this current trajectory is only going to bring us to a dystopia, a technotopia, the demolition of all of the natural world. It's nothing that we want to be living in. So if everyone on subconscious level recognizes that this is the problem, that this current way of life is inherently unsustainable, why isn't everyone freaking out? Why isn't everyone doing something? And I think that part of the answer to that question is that civilization isn't just a material set of circumstances, but it's also a set of ideologies and myths that are perpetuated in order to justify this current trajectory. So, to tell people it's okay, this is the way it's always been, this is the way it's always going to be. If we look at the first myths of civilization, you see things like the Epic of Gilgamesh, with Gilgamesh is this guy who just goes into Iraq and deforests the hills in order to create a society for himself. And these are the first stories of civilization. This is what we've been told is normal, natural, and necessary. So we all know this story, We all know this story by heart. Humans are more intelligent than the rest of the creatures. Humans use their superior intelligence to create a world that's better for them. And the changes that are made are natural and necessary, and helping them is a good thing. Creating these changes and working to progress is a good thing. But one of the most potent stories of civilization we probably know as well, and that's the one that humans are better than, or humans are separate from and above the rest of the natural world. This is something we've been told a lot. We don't really think of ourselves normally as part of the natural world, or one inside of it. We think of ourselves and then nature. So this is a myth that's kind of been ingrained in all of us. And we're kind of reminded of Francis Bacon's infamous statement that nature had to be hounded and made a slave to the new mechanized devices, and science had to torture nature's secrets out of her. So this is a guy who basically spearheaded the Enlightenment era and the age of machinery and rationality, and this is kind of what brought on the Industrial Revolution. This is the mentality that fed into the situation that we live today. And it's really no coincidence that Bacon's words remind us of rape, because what civilization does to the natural world, it does to the lesser of humans. The cult of masculinity's violation imperative doesn't really know any boundaries. It doesn't. And this is why we say industrial civilization is inherently racist, oppressive, classist, and patriarchal. Because we think that the ongoing destruction of the natural world is the enactment of a mentality which justifies the subordination of oppressed classes of people. It's the same mentality. The same mentality that finds it acceptable to level forests and turn over mountaintops, to stop the flowing of rivers and consume entire species one by one, also finds it appropriate to rape, batter, and abuse women, to steal indigenous land, to appropriate their culture, to maintain poverty and strip privilege from people of color, and to call people who merely come from a different location aliens. This is why we say that environmental and social justice issues are inextricable. And this is why we say that in addressing any one of them, you have to address them all.
Is that okay for everybody if I take pictures? Raise your hand if you don't want to do that.
Yeah.
Okay.